Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. We are very excited to host this event, Student Parent Data Stories, How Collecting Data on Parenting Students Affects Policy, Practice, and People's Lives. I'm Teresa Anderson. I'm glad to welcome you from the Urban Institute. This event is in partnership with Generation Hope and the National Governors Association, who we'll hear from in a moment. We're really excited to have this event today with voices from across the country, kicking off National Student Parent Month. And this event is part of the Data to Action campaign to support pregnant and parenting students, which I'll talk about more at the end of the event. But just want to note that we're grateful to ECMC Foundation for direct support of this, as well as the other supporters of the Data to Action campaign, the Ford Family Foundation and the Lumina Foundation, for prioritizing and supporting capacity building around the important issues we'll be talking about today. So just to begin with some housekeeping remarks, the event today is being recorded and the recording will be posted online afterwards. This event may also be live streamed on some people are not hearing audio. Looks like it's okay. This event may also be live streamed. Closed captioning is enabled, so you can adjust the settings with your caption button within Zoom. And speaker biographies are available online at urban.org. And for those on the Zoom, we'll be sharing the link directly to those. All participants are muted, but feel free to share your thoughts in the chat box or send any questions for the speakers in the Q&A box. And we'll also have a survey at the end of the event. We ask that you take 1 or 2 minutes to complete that so that we can hear your feedback. And finally, please feel free to engage with us online on social media platform of your choice using hashtag #live@urban. So with this, I noted that this is the kickoff of the 3rd annual National Student Parent Month, and I want to turn the microphone over to Tanya Eng, who's the Managing Director of Advocacy at Higher Learning Advocates, to talk a little bit about what National Student Parent Month is and why this matters for this population.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Sorry, I was having some technical difficulties there. Good afternoon and morning for some of you. I'm really excited and honored to be here today to join you all in kicking off the 3rd annual National Student Parent Month with this essential conversation. High Learning Advocates is a nonprofit advocacy organization that advocates for policies and programs that ensure opportunity and promote inclusive pathways for today's students to succeed through an equitable system of higher learning, employment, and economic mobility. National Student Parent Month came about in 2021 by a cohort of parenting student advocates looking to help bring awareness of parenting students by elevating the stories and experiences to policymakers with the goal of highlighting ways to remove barriers that impact their higher education journey. Each year, the month gets larger and larger, with so many of you looking to share many stories of parenting students and to advocate for change to better support them. And today's conversation is an excellent way to kick off the month. I'm honored to be here to welcome everyone and looking forward to hear what everyone has to say. And I'll pass it on back to you, Teresa.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Thank you to Higher Learning Advocates for all the work that you've done to codify this month. It's something that needs to be re-upped by Congress every year, and we've had great support from Congress in elevating the profile of parenting students. And hopefully it's something that will continue for many years to come. And regardless of whether things are officially acknowledged in Congress, we will always celebrate National Student Parent Month and try to bring policy, practice, and life-changing solutions to parents who are trying to pursue their education goals. So with that, this event is co-hosted by Generation Hope and National Governors Association. They've been our partners in planning this work, and we're so grateful. I want to allow our close collaborators, Marley Breakstone and Portia Polk, Marley who's the Senior Policy Manager from Generation Hope, to say hello, and then we'll pass it to Portia, who is a Senior Policy Analyst at the National Governors Association. So with that, Marley.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here today. Apologies, my camera is not working. But my name is Marley Breakstone. I'm the Senior Policy Manager at Generation Hope, and I am really excited to kick off Student Parent Month this year with all of you discussing this important topic. So, Generation Hope is an organization that's dedicated to ensuring that all student parents have the opportunities to succeed and experience economic mobility in higher education and beyond. We do direct service work in the DC metro area, as well as in New Orleans, and also do national policy and advocacy work. So we're really excited to have this policy conversation with so many awesome partners and advocates around the country. So thank you again for being here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Portia Polk, and I serve as the Senior Policy Analyst for Post-Secondary with the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices. The NGA Center for Best Practices provides our nation's governors with advice and counsel across the full range of policy issues facing states today to help them develop innovative solutions to their challenges. And while the policy areas we support are diverse and the solutions equally so, we often see a common theme that runs through much of what we do, and that's the role that data can play to improve policymaking and decision-making. So with that, we're really excited to be a co-host for this conversation, as we know collecting student data, especially that of student parents, is top of mind for students and their families, institutional leaders, as well as state leaders. So thank you all again for joining us. And with that, I'll pass it back to Teresa.
Thank you, Portia and Marley, for your partnership and your thought partnership in this field. So before we go into the remarks from our panelists, I wanted to talk a little bit about who we are talking about when we talk about student parents. And some folks watching this are probably very familiar, and others may wonder what we're referencing. So when we talk about student parents, we're talking about about 4.5 million students in the United States who have dependent children, an even larger number that may have child caregiving responsibilities. That's about 1 in 5 undergraduate students in the United States and about 1 in 4 graduate students. There is no systematic way that parenting status is tracked or collected within students' records or in other routine data collection. So it's hard to understand or know how student parents are faring in higher education relative to other students, except through smaller data collection efforts and qualitative research. And what we do know from that work, as well as from national surveys that are representative of the student population, but don't capture all students at every institution, is that student parents are a highly motivated subset of college students. They get grades that are equal, if not higher, than non-parenting peers, and are often very driven to do well for their education, family and life, towards their education, family, and life goals for the benefit of their children and families. But parenting students face a lot more barriers to being able to complete their educational programs and goals, and are much more likely to stop out or leave education programs before they complete. And it can take a very long time, sometimes 10 years or more, to complete even what some might call a 2-year or a 4-year program. However, when parenting students complete their educational goals, there's huge intergenerational benefits. And some of my research has shown that when tracking student mothers specifically over 20 years after they re-enter school, that for those who complete, their children are much better off, both in their own education outcomes, as well as labor market outcomes and other indicators of long-term well-being. But we also see that there are challenges that families face during the process of being in school and trying to often juggle not only parenting and student hats, but also often worker hats, because about 70% of parenting students are working while in school in non-work study jobs. So a lot of the discussion that has been taking place in this policy space is about how to create more opportunities for adults with children or young adults with children to be able to access and persist in higher education, and then how to make that whole process smoother so that there is an opportunity for the families to appreciate those benefits. The other piece of this is that parenting students are most likely to be women. About 70% of parenting students are women, and they're more likely to be women of color. And so there are equity and diversity and inclusion issues that are implicated in this. But even more so, pregnant students specifically are protected under federal Title IX regulations. And there's draft regulations that have been put out by the U.S. Department of Education. There will be finalized rules about this shortly. But this is not only something that's good to do, but it's actually a mandate to support pregnant students and by extension, parenting students in being able to have equal access to education. So this is an important issue, but the lack of data has been a barrier to being able to move forward on creating better approaches to support parenting students and their children, as well as adults in the population who may want to go back to school. So with this, we're really excited to have a set of conversations today from across the country, having people share stories about why this matters, both for themselves personally, for those they work with, and from their institutional, organizational, or policy points of view. And with that, I'm pleased to hand over the Zoom microphone to Jamie Williams, a Senior Higher Education Impact Manager at Generation Hope.
Thank you so much, Teresa, and I appreciate being in this space with you all today. So as mentioned, I'm Dr. Williams. I am part of a team of folks at Generation Hope that provide technical assistance to colleges, universities, and other organizations seeking to transform the landscape of higher education to better support student-parent success. So with that, if I can have my slides pulled up, that would be lovely. Specifically, we work to improve processes across the 4 student-parent success core competencies of people, culture, policy, and data, all of which have the foundational element of striving for racial equity. And we work with colleges and university in Generation Hope's Family U program. We help them learn, share, and grow equitable and supportive student-parent data practices and policies by examining the why, the who, the what, the when, the where, and the how of student-parent data collection. Each entity doing this work should start with the why. Why are these data important to collect? Why does it matter? Why should others care? Why student parents, which Teresa spoke to a little bit earlier. And many of us in this space today may know the why, but we need to be explicit with sharing the why with others to bring them into the work. And then we move into the who with institutions, which is multifaceted. Who are we talking about when we say student parent? Again, Teresa laid that out very nicely for us, but we also want to make sure that when we're talking about who, we establish within institutions and in state policy who is responsible for collecting, analyzing, and presenting these data. Whenever possible, we work with teams to explicitly build these roles and responsibilities into formalized processes so they don't get dropped. They're really built into the system. And furthermore, we need to address who will receive and engage with these data, who's our audience, so that we make sure that we're tailoring messages and information to that audience. We then work on identifying the what, which pertains to identifying what we need to better elevate the visibility, the needs, and the stories of student parents. Of course, we want quantitative data that will help put numbers in front of decision makers, but we also want to ensure that we are gathering qualitative data from student parents about what barriers the system has put in their way and what supports would help them succeed. I'm going to circle back to what elements of quantitative data are also helpful in the moment. We also want to make sure we establish a clear schedule of when we are gathering this information. As we know, student parenting status can change for a student overnight. So institutions should collect parenting status at least annually, but semesterly is better. The how is where there is the most room for institution-specific and state-specific practices, but it is also where institutions are often left at a loss and may feel floundering, especially after there's a state policy that comes out requiring student-parent data collection and reporting as part of an unfunded mandate. So we work with institutions on establishing how the data are being collected, how they are being shared, how they are being used, and addressing the questions of how is the institution honoring the lived experiences of student parents, and how will the institution recognize and demonstrate appreciation for the value student parents bring to the classroom and their institution. Working with institutions from coast to coast, we have seen collection strategies that have varied significantly and included collecting parenting information on applications for enrollment and admissions, graduation, scholarships, priority registration. We've also seen the prompts in surveys and questionnaires that include embedding student parent focused prompts in the NESI, the SESI, and other pre-existing student engagement and student experience surveys that institutions are already putting out there to their student body, and establishing student parent and childcare specific needs surveys via mass email or text annually or semesterly. We've also seen prompts integrated into other forms students need to complete, such as advising intake forms or course intro forms. And among the most effective collection strategies, institutions are embedding the student parent field or an attribute in the institution's student information system, banner, PeopleSoft, things of that nature. We have seen these set up in a way for students to self-disclose their parenting status and update it when prompted to review any other record changes like their mailing address. We've also seen institutions and worked with them on building attributes in the student information system that faculty and staff working directly with students can update themselves. And I want to put in another plug for asking open-ended questions at times and providing opportunities to engage student parents in focus groups or interviews where they can share more of their lived experiences. Another element of the how that we're talking about is how an institution demonstrates to student parents that, one, it is safe for them to disclose they are parenting, and two, that they should invest any of their precious time to share their parenting identity and experience with the institution. And to do this, institutions need to establish a culture where student parents feel seen and invited to share, distribute student parent data to the stakeholders at various levels to further the awareness of the student parent population, and act on the information shared to leverage additional resources and support for student parents. What we've seen can really accelerate all of this work are policies at state and federal levels to further student parent data collection efforts at a larger scale. Last year, we saw this with our California institutions after Assembly Bill 2881 passed. And earlier this summer, Texas passed student parent supportive legislation that emphasizes the protections and rights of pregnant and parenting students, also including priority registration. And the legislation now requires institutions to have a designated student parent support liaison and collect and report student parent data up to the states. So the Texas Senate Bill 412 goes into effect today, September 1, with web-based resources and priority registration needing to be in place by January 15th. In the past month, the college districts we work with in Texas have reported an enhanced buy-in and accountability from their institutions, senior administrators, and governing bodies, elevated awareness of the student parent population at large, common language being used across their systems, and colleagues from across the state working together to explore how to best meet the directives of the bill. Next slide, please. And going back for a moment to the what of data collection, it is important that institutions do not stop with asking students about their parenting status. That's just the beginning. We want to know more about their overall experience to know how to better support them. And this includes knowing the number and ages of their children. And most institutions are also already collecting other demographic and personal information on students. When possible, exploring the intersecting identities of student parents can highlight disparate incomes and further inform whether where institutions should really be dedicating their efforts and how to best support the student body. This also circles back to our why of data collection. Institutions that are collecting and sharing these data points with their stakeholders and with the larger student parent success movement have reported strengthened support from senior administrators and governing bodies, clearer pathways to allocating resources to better support student parents, recognition from local, state, and national news outlets, student parent organizations and affinity groups among student parents and their non-parenting peers popping up across their institution, increased interest from donors to support pregnant and parenting students, and student parent supportive policies regarding children being on campus and in the classroom, campus building resources and requirements, so including lactation spaces, changing tables, things of that nature, and more informed training for faculty and staff. Data collection at a larger scale is necessary for institutional success, as well as furthering the collective movement of ensuring equitable access to quality education and economic mobility for families in the United States. With that, I'm now going to pass it over to Caroline Sanders, Associate Director of Community Relations and Engagement at Eastern Michigan University and Commissioner of District 4 in Washtenaw County, Michigan. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for offering me the opportunity to share some information with you. So my topic is really to share with you why I pushed for reporting on students with children in Michigan with the 15 public institutions, of which I am employed by one. So just briefly, about 24 years ago, I returned to higher ed to get a master's degree with a 2-year-old. And after about a year of sort of whining and complaining because there was no support, I then formed a student organization called Students with Children in order to help support fellow students like myself in terms of, watching each other's kids in the evening while we took classes. All our classes were in the evening. And in response to what were and still kind of continue to be administrative barriers for students with children. And in light of, so that was 24 years ago, as I continued my journey at my institution, I noticed that the population was increasing. I was increasingly seeing children being left in the hallways in our academic buildings because they were not allowed to come into the classroom with their parents, and that was very disturbing to me. I also started a PhD program, and my topic was students with children in higher ed. I'm losing my terminology now, the imposter syndrome. So I kind of got frustrated. I kept trying to get answers for why my institution could not give me numbers. And I also sought information with 6 other of my fellow institutions about why we couldn't get definitive numbers about how many students with children were actually on our campus. And as we do as parents, or even as advocates, you get mad enough and you just kind of find another way around. So I reached out to a colleague that I had known previously who was now working for Governor Whitmer here in the state of Michigan. And I pled my case that not having this documentation was not only academic discrimination, but it was also a workforce issue for our state. And she agreed with me. And she moved forward to create some language using the draft that I provided to her to mandate one time. They haven't turned it into boilerplate language, which means it would be permanent every year, to request all 15 of these public institutions to report out on the number of students with children that they have on campus, the services that they currently provide to those students, and what are the additional barriers that those students still face as they attempt to try and complete their degrees. And just in a nutshell, I'm going to read you just a brief snippet of the language that they used when they required the public institutions to be responsive. They named it Section 275I, and it says, each public university receiving an appropriation in Section 236 shall use a portion of those funds to collect demographic information about students with dependent children to better identify the needs of those students, barriers to degree and certification completion for them, and campus support structures and resources available to them. And I insisted that they have some safeguards built in there. So the information would be voluntary. Students would not be mandated to give it, but they would be voluntary. They would also be given the information about how and what the information was going to be used for, that their privacy would be protected. And then Each public university shall report to the Senate and House Appropriations Subcommittees on Higher Education, the Senate and House fiscal agencies, and the Senate Budget Director its collected data and survey results by the first day of February. Now, they did comply with that information, but I will tell you they were disgruntled. They gave our government relations person in Lansing a very hard time, and they called the reports the dreaded EMU report. So they provided that information one time. That was about 3 years ago. And I am now at the point that I have reached out to my elected officials, and I am requesting that they make this boilerplate language. So we missed the deadline this year in terms of getting it done for this year's budget, but I have been promised that next year, this will be a priority of those electeds to make sure that this becomes boilerplate language moving forward. So in other words, universities, when they submit their request for funding, annual funding, they will need to provide this information. This is the only way with this data that we will be able to encourage, advocate, shame, however you want to name it, entities that interact with this population, that it is a viable population and that we are in need of support. What I have found is that if you don't collect the data, you can say, oh, we don't know. We're not sure. We didn't know that we were ignoring this population. My personal opinion, it's a strategy on the part of higher ed not to purposely collect this information. So that was the reason behind my asking for this information. And truthfully, it was such a blessing that I found someone that agreed with my logic and requested the information while she still worked for the governor's office. And it is going to be sort of the foundation for how we move forward in making sure that this information is collected on a regular basis, especially in line with the initiatives that our governor has put into place to support families and universities or institutions of higher learning. So I'm at my 7 minutes. Thank you so much. I am going to now turn this over to, I believe I'm turning it over to Heather, unless Autumn is on the call.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you should be today. I'm so honored to be here, and I'm so grateful for this event. So when I was asked to present some stories on why collecting high quality data on the parenting student population is so important, I immediately thought of all these amazing parenting students I've worked with through the years, or worked alongside through the years. And I also realized that as a parenting student, and I've been told by other parenting students that sometimes also what's really helpful is hearing from somebody that's made it through to the other side and is now working to make things better. So I'm just going to tell you a little snippet, a little slice of my own story, in the hopes that it'll bring some knowledge. So about 15 years ago, I found myself stopped out of my undergraduate degree. I was pregnant and we were homeless. So the Great Recession had hit my partner at the time and I really hard. And we ended up living in the van. We just couldn't make rent, even though we were still working. So I go into social services and I say, hey, I've never accessed social services. I'm so close to finishing my undergraduate degree. I have less than a year left. I never meant to drop out permanently. What can we do to get us back on track? And they were very straightforward with me. They said, well, to be honest, the low-income housing wait lists are backed up for years. The family shelters are completely full. The educational programs really aren't designed for someone like you. Our educational programs are more for two-year students or those that haven't made as much progress towards their degree. So they said, well, we can give you some food subsidies with SNAP. We can take care of your medical insurance. But other than that, apply for financial aid and good luck to you. So I walked out feeling obviously extremely discouraged. and ultimately very alone. I didn't have any information out there to let me know that there were millions of other parenting and pregnant students trying to make it through their education. And so, fast forward, we ended up being housed. My daughter was born, and when she was a few months old, I re-enrolled in an undergraduate program. I really didn't know how I was going to make it. We didn't know how we were paying the bills. The car was constantly breaking down. There was no affordable childcare. And the reason I really made it through was that community stepped forward for me. So trusted women and mothers I knew offered free childcare so that I could go to class and I could get my homework done. And that was, in the end, what really made it possible for me to go. And I've never forgotten that experience of that targeted, unconditional support, being recognized and seen, and given what I needed to complete my education. And that's carried me through my career since then. So fast forward a little bit more. My daughter goes back to kindergarten, and I now have an option for childcare. And so I enroll in a master's program. And I was very blessed to be at Cal Poly Humboldt, which was part of the founding movement of the basic needs movement, and work alongside amazing dynamic faculty and staff that was a part of that movement. So one of the reasons we were so successful at Cal Poly Humboldt was that we started with data collection. At the time, there's really almost nothing to tell the story of food and housing insecurity for students. And so we began with that. And the whole time, parenting students were always a core part of these efforts. And basic needs items have always been on the core agenda of parenting students. So later, when I went on to pursue my PhD in public policy, I realized that there was very little out there on parenting students, and I was a little confused by it. I knew that we were out there, and I knew that we were part of so many important efforts on campuses. And so I made it my mission to learn more. And I'm going to show you a little bit about what I learned. And I'll make this brief for the sake of time, and those resources will be available. So on the basic needs side, there's a shocking rate of basic needs insecurity among parenting students, even higher than the average student population. So we can see here through the graph up to 69%. For housing insecurity, up to 54% for food insecurity, and homelessness at 17%. So I was part of that 17%. We also see that most can't afford childcare, and that single parents report this slightly more, but in general, you can see by this orange graph that most can't afford their childcare. We also see that those who can't afford their basic needs are more likely to experience depression and anxiety, significantly more. And then, as our other panelists will talk about, the completion rates are much lower, right? So 50%, about a 50% completion rate for all student parents. So this tells us two things. One, it tells us we need to address this immediately, and that there are completely understandable reasons why this happens. The other point is 50% make it. Despite it all, they make it. And so there's an amazing amount of resiliency and problem solving and grit that comes with that. And so part of the reason these kinds of graphs are so important, these kind of data, is that I can't tell you how many times I've been in conversations where this information has literally paused a room. Just a moment of silence. Even leadership that is very rarely surprised. And that's because there's the first time that you are going to hear something. But in order for a lot of leadership to make these kind of decisions, they need the facts. They need the data. They need to understand what's going on so that they know how to budget. They know how to understand the scope. They know where we need to learn more to identify the disparities. And they need to know how to create better policies and then how to track it to see if what we're doing is being effective. So part of what we're doing at the University of California, we're very excited about AB 2881. And as mentioned, AB 2881 provides for a priority registration. So one of the things it does is it allows parents to be seen and understood for the time conflicts, the scheduling difficulties. But what it also does is by default creates the encouragement to develop consistent means of identifying parenting students in the system so that they can access that priority registration. And so the University of California Office of the President has issued guidance on 2881 that was crafted carefully in collaboration with experts in parenting programs, basic needs, Title IX, mental health and well-being, and advanced researchers, as such as Spark and some of the members of this panel you will see today. And it will offer that guidance to the community. We're also going to pair this with the community practice so that the system as a whole, all 10 campuses across the system, can come together and talk about the amazing work they're already doing. I'm so proud of so many of our campuses, and also support each other in creating those solutions, identifying the problems, understanding how to track the data better and what to do with the data. So moving forward, we're so encouraged by this. We're so encouraged by the recognition that 2881 brings parenting students. And we're also just so encouraged about what the future of the data collection is going to bring us. It's going to bring us clarity and insight and collaboration. So thank you so much for listening to my story and some of what we're doing in the University of California. I'm going to turn it over now to Miriam Cullimore, student, parent, and whole family coordinator for the Minnesota Office of Higher Ed.
Thank you, Heather. I am honored to be here today and to serve as the student, parent, and whole family coordinator with the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. I come to this work as a former student parent and the child of student parents. When I started in this position almost 2 years ago, one of the first projects I conducted was to survey the supports available to student parents and their families at each college campus in Minnesota. In that process, I had many conversations with parenting students and higher ed staff who support them. Based on these conversations, as well as my own lived experience, it is clear that parenting students often feel invisible, even when reaching out for support. I remember sitting in my advisor's office trying to explain why I needed to take an extra heavy course load that semester. I was 22 in the last year of my undergraduate degree program and had a 4-year-old at home. We were struggling financially, and I needed to graduate so I could work full time. I thought that because my advisor focused her research on mothers in poverty, I would be in good hands. I thought she would understand. However, she couldn't understand why I was rushing and pushed for me to apply for graduate school, which at the time felt like an impossible feat. I felt completely unheard and defeated. This past year, a student parent shared that when she went to the Student Parent Support Center on her campus, one of only 6 in the state currently, she found it was primarily geared toward undergraduates and she didn't feel welcome. Another example of the invisibility of student parents was shared with me by the director of a student support center. She told me that her campus had known about roughly 300 student parents in their system. However, when a grad student conducted a campus-wide survey, there were over 900 students who self-reported that they were a parent. These qualitative collection activities were important as they provided a way to see the experiences of parenting students, but they aren't our only sources of data. Most of our data are derived from the FAFSA and state financial aid applications, such as the Minnesota State Grant and the Minnesota Child Care Grant, along with limited data from other state agencies. National sources like the Institute for Women's Policy Research and the Education Trust have also been useful. However, none of these sources truly show the size of the parenting student population in our state, nor do they provide a comprehensive look at how these students and their families are doing. What is apparent is that gaps exist, and without a better understanding, appropriate policy changes and allocation of resources isn't possible. Without consistent, comprehensive, and ongoing data collection about student parents and their families, it is difficult to make their needs visible. What limited data we do have paint a difficult picture. We know in Minnesota, our student parents are likely to identify as female. They tend to be unmarried, enrolled part-time, and low income. About half of student parents who applied for a state grant last year identified as BIPOC. Over 50% of unmarried student parents who received a state grant in the 2019-2020 academic year had an annual incomes under $20,000. We also know that of the Minnesota students who received SNAP benefits between September and December of 2021, 39% of them reported having a child at home. And according to recent findings by the Education Trust, Minnesota student parents earning minimum wage needed to work about 50 hours per week in order to cover tuition at a public institution and childcare. This does not account for housing and other living expenses. We also know that student parents were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. According to FAFSA data, Minnesota saw year-over-year double-digit drops in the re-enrollment rate of student parents during the pandemic. So it sounds like pretty decent data, but it's not sufficient. Why are these data insufficient? We know not everyone completes the FAFSA or applies for state financial aid, so we are likely missing a fair number of student parents by relying primarily on these data sets. According to the available FAFSA data for the 21-22 school year, only 84% of entering undergraduates in Minnesota completed the FAFSA, and that FAFSA doesn't always identify parental or guardianship status. State financial aid data is helpful in seeing how many students apply and where those students are attending. However, not all institutions of higher education participate in these financial aid programs. For instance, only 53 institutions across the state participate in the Minnesota Child Care Grant Program. While all of these data sets are valuable and helpful in their own way, none of them can account for the total population of student parents in Minnesota or how they and their families are doing. We need ongoing comprehensive data collection in conjunction with basic needs data to make the student parent population visible and their needs known. There are significant challenges that we've experienced when pursuing better data collection methods. There's been resistance at some institutions due to the lack of awareness of student parents on their campuses. Financial and staff capacity constraints at both the state and campus levels are an ongoing concern. The assumption that our current data sources are sufficient and representative. Additionally, the need for data sharing agreements between and across state agencies and institutions of higher ed that could give us a better picture of student parents and their families that use existing data. That's a real barrier. Also, not all state agencies ask about college enrollment when people apply for their services. So that makes it really difficult to compare across systems. Another challenge has been aligning and coordinating efforts that are currently underway by different groups across the state, particularly around how to collect data that is comparable from one system to the next. All of that being said, there is substantial work underway in Minnesota to remedy some of these. This past spring, the Minnesota legislature approved the One Minnesota budget, which includes $6 million over the next 2 years to provide direct, individualized supportive services for student parents. These funds will create a competitive grant program for institutions of higher education, and all participating institutions will be required to collect data on their student parent population. It's a big win. I'm very excited. This is a joint effort between the Minnesota Office of Higher Education and the Minnesota Department of Health. Our office, in partnership with the Min-State System of Colleges and Universities, is also participating in the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education Basic Needs Security Technical Assistance Program to develop a comprehensive survey that examines student basic needs as well as parental status to provide more timely campus-level data at public institutions. And we are exploring the possibility of state-level policies around data collection and better alignment of supportive services for student parents with the new Title IX regulations. There's a lot of room for improvement, but we're very excited about where these efforts are headed. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Erica Hernandez, Associate Professor in the Department of Psychology at Bowie State University. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Erica Hernandez. I'm a faculty member at the oldest of Maryland's historically Black colleges and universities, Bowie State University. So my perspective is a bit different as a faculty member, but I definitely want to say that Maryland is a work in progress. We don't have a data collection bill, similar to some of the other states that you've heard about. And no institution in the state of Maryland, to my knowledge, has student record level data across the student body about parenting status. So we do have a few institutions that are asking for voluntary surveys about parenting status. And on these efforts, many of our community colleges are leading the way. Here at Bowie State, I think I first started noticing that I had students who had children in my classes when they would start to bring their child in with them to class when there wasn't daycare. Sometimes this was during night classes because in our area, most daycares close at 6 p.m. So for night classes, there either needs to be a friend or family member who is willing to watch the child, or the student brings the child to class with them at the discretion of their instructor. But at Bowie State and at many other institutions, there's not an explicit policy stating that minors are allowed on campus under the supervision of their adults. So that's one of the things that we're working on at my institution. So I was a new parent in 2014 and 2016, and that really kind of drove home some of the experiences that some student parents had shared with me. And I started first by gathering some student parents and some other interested faculty and staff at Bowie State in 2019, right before COVID hit. And so we started to do the family-friendly campus toolkit, which is a wonderful resource that provides kind of guidance along with survey questions and focus group questions. But without having leadership on campus on our committee and support to move it forward, it stalled. And then of course, COVID happened and everything kind of shut down. But we did start to get some data and we started having these conversations. Interestingly, COVID might have helped a little bit in terms of visibility for student parents, because now faculty members were sort of in students' living room on Zoom when they went to virtual instruction, and could see how many students had children at home, either their own children or other children in the family that they were responsible for providing childcare for. So as we started raising awareness over the years like 2019 through 2021, we started to get a little bit of FAFSA data, but FAFSA data in our state, it's kind of dependent on the legal opinion of the current Attorney General as to what purposes FAFSA data can be used for. So we were not able to get some of the data from FAFSA. And not to mention that, as you've heard from other speakers, FAFSA is an undercount. Not everyone fills out the FAFSA. So, but getting some data on student parents did help to apply for grants. So I did apply for and receive the C-Campus grant from the Department of Education. Childcare Access Means Parents in School. And also the Black and Native Family Futures Fund from Ascend at the Aspen Institute. We started the Student Parent Association. So we have a student organization for student parents, and they have been just crucial in raising the awareness and visibility of student parents on our campus, and also serving on the task force that is helping to look at our practices and policies at Bowie State. So part of C-Campus was that we need to have some data reflecting how many student parents that we have. As part of that, we have I've asked for a student information system indicator for student parents so that I can start to manually add that indicator in the system. But the data that we had really helped to drive forward not only getting a grant, the grants lead visibility to student parents. And then we were also able to use some of that data to share with our case managers that help with basic needs, so that we could start to refer students for benefits such as SNAP and WIC. So we did do the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit survey again in May and June of this year, as well as some focus groups under the Ascend grant with the technical assistance from Teamer Strategy Group. And some salient data from that. We found that of the 62 student parents that were surveyed on that voluntary survey, 71% were Pell recipients, which was a statistic that really resonated with the people that I talked to in the administration, because that indicates a low income status and that these students may be at higher risk. We also found that about half of the student parents on the survey reported stopping out during their schooling, and the average stop out was about 2 semesters. Over half of student parents work full-time while they're in school. Half experience food insecurity, either moderate or severe food insecurity. And then from the focus group, the the qualitative information, that many of the student parents reported a sense of missing out on the college experience. That kind of like they didn't really get a college experience like they thought other students were getting because of having family and caretaking responsibilities. So interestingly to me, the statistics that stand out to different audiences are going to depend on what their job responsibilities are. So if you're sharing data with people that you're working with, it's important to think about what their job responsibilities are and what pieces of the data set would be most meaningful to them. And so for us, in a lot of cases, it's going to be retention and graduation. So that could be a good focus for data. So we use some of this data, the qualitative and the quantitative data, to set some goals for what we want to do at Bowie State. And just the quantitative data about, especially the count, that's a lot of the questions that I get is how many students are we talking about here? So when I ask for something to support student parents, that's going to be something really important, a data point of like approximately how many. And I still tell them we don't really know. This is our best estimate, but we do need better record collection at the student record level. I also try to emphasize the strengths. So the strengths of student parents, one of the biggest strengths that student parents have is motivation. They're motivated to improve the financial stability and outlook for their family, and to provide a good education or a good example of how important education is within the family. So I like to use some of the qualitative data to not just have kind of a deficits model outlook towards student parents, but to also emphasize the strengths of student parents. And I also use some of this data in a faculty training. I use one of the focus groups quotes as like a vignette to say, how would we accommodate this student who was pregnant and gave birth during the semester? So I'm starting to do some faculty training on that. Within the state, we have a group that has been facilitated by Teresa Anderson on this call, as well as others from the Spark Collaborative, from Urban Institute, from Generation Hope, also National Governors Association, to kind of connect people within Maryland to get the discussions started about how can we best support student parents in Maryland. And I really like that group, especially since I wouldn't have met some of these folks if it were not from being introduced by Teresa and others. And the community colleges and the four-year institutions, which we are not part of the same system in Maryland. So historically, we don't always talk between community colleges and four-year institutions. So I really value that collaboration. I also was able to start a group within the university system of Maryland, which is the public four-year institutions, most of them. And it was interesting because we had volunteers from the different campuses across roles. Some were student affairs, some were case managers, some were faculty. And we have the goal of raising awareness as well as sharing information such as when the C Campus grant was open, and sharing resources with each other about how to best make a case for C Campus at the institution. And we're discussing whether we would like to try to do family-friendly campus toolkit survey for student parents as a cohort in Maryland. We're also discussing, while there's a groundswell of support building in Maryland for possible legislation modeled after that of Oregon, Illinois, and Texas, about having data collection about our student parents from higher institutions of higher education in Maryland, and reporting up to our Maryland Higher Education Commission, MHEC. Towards that, also, there was interestingly a request in the Maryland Joint Chairman's Report in 2023 asking for data by institution on the number of students who identify as parents or a person acting as a parent or legal guardian. And our Higher Education Commission, MHEC, has this report on advising and wraparound services that's due October 1st that they're working on. And so hopefully this will provide some support for data on what's currently known, but also what's currently not known in Maryland as far as the numbers of student parents. I've also made a data request from our longitudinal data system to look at independent students with a family size greater than 1 to look at different outcomes, and that's still in the pipeline. But momentum is growing in Maryland towards collecting more data about our student parents so that we can make the case of what supports that we can offer to student parents, how can we find the student parents that need support, and how can we involve student parents in the process, co-creating support and resources with student parent voices at the center of what we're doing in Maryland. So with that, I would like to pass it on to Yoselin Amaya Hernandez, no relation, Student Advocacy Coordinator at Generation Hope.
Thank you so much, Erica. My name is Yoselin Amaya Hernandez, and I am the Student Advocacy Coordinator for Generation Hope, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you. As we've heard from several experts today, data collection is imperative to ensure that the correct supports for student parents are put in place. Data collection not only allows for supports to be put in place to help bridge gaps for student parents, but it also helps institutions create community for a group that often feels like they are alone. It creates a community that they can rely on and connect with, so they can feel like someone understands the struggles that they are going through. I say that because as a former student parent, I often felt alone and felt like I was the only one. But being part of Montgomery College's Ascend Parent Initiative Task Force and now their Student Parent Advisory Group, I have been able to meet and connect with other student parents and have found that I was never actually alone. Navigating college during the pandemic as a student parent was difficult, but navigating as a non-documented person of color, that exacerbated my struggles. During my time at my four-year institution, out of 30,000 students, only 120 were DACA recipients. I was one of those 120 students. I had no access to emergency aid funding due to my status, but my needs were greater than most because I had 2 small children at home. And when I got COVID and was out for 2 weeks, I did not get paid. Thankfully, I had amazing advocates and supporters like Generation Hope who were able to provide me with assistance to help fill those gaps during that time. The institution did not think to support someone like me because they didn't even know I existed. They didn't know that a student parent existed on campus, so they were not thinking of how to support student parents and their need. Less than 1% of the population was a DACA recipient, so it wasn't a significant number that existed to warrant their consideration. And never in their wildest dream did they ever think an undocumented student parent would walk on their campus. When I transferred from my 2-year community college, I did a project on creating a family-friendly space on campus, and my teacher said that it was a great idea. Little did he know that a space like that already existed on campus, but he was not even aware. The institution was never prepared to support someone like me because they didn't ask. This is only out of the many examples of how student parents have different intersecting identities that can make college attainment difficult. As Dr. Williams said at the beginning of this webinar, understanding all the intersecting identities will be beneficial to know what types of supports student parents need that will meet them where they are. Yes, I sit here as a first-gen undocumented student parent who was able to succeed, but I was only able to succeed thanks to the village and the supports I had from Generation Hope. I have used my lived experience and my expertise to be able to work alongside amazing advocates so we can help bridge that gap. As Generation Hope is not only working towards bridging these gaps through our Family U program, we're also working through our own advocacy efforts and through our own research efforts. As Generation Hope Student Advocacy Coordinator, I have been able to coordinate conversations with elected officials in Maryland to discuss the need for data collection. And we have been able to get some language about it included in the state budget. I have worked alongside Montgomery College to create a survey that will help them collect data around their student parents, and they were able to finally figure out who their student parents were on campus and how they can best support them and continue this work. I have personally conducted focus groups to get a better understanding of what student parents need, because while I have the lived experience, the student parent experience is not monolithic. I have used my lived experience to advocate for the needs of our student parents. Student parents are not looking for a handout, but they are looking for a hand up. And we cannot ask someone to work to dismantle the cycle of poverty without supporting in that work. And to support them, we first need to know what they need. Yes, data collection are numbers, but behind those numbers, there are stories of real people, of people like me, of people you've heard from today. So I ask you, think about this and really go home and dive into all the information that you've heard today. Data collection, again, yes, it's numbers, but again, behind those numbers, there are real people. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoselin. Thank you, everybody, for sharing stories about your personal, your professional, and your policy journeys in relation to being a parenting student, supporting them through data collection, the role that data plays in being able to move forward in policy and practice spaces. Thank you, Yoselin, especially for and Heather and Caroline and others who really went into your personal backgrounds and why this is salient for you. That's not only for you all, the across the board, parenting students often feel isolated, feel like they're the only ones on campus, especially at universities, but they're not. And in fact, this is not an issue that is just at two-year community colleges. About 40% of parenting students are at universities or four-year colleges. And the goal is to be able to allow students who have children to be able to reach whatever education goal they have, including on to graduate school and PhDs. Our colleague Autumn Green, who wasn't able to join today, tells a story of how she went from GED to PhD as a parenting mother, as a mother with two children. And this is an important opportunity to be able to make available. So all that said, I'm bringing this back around to talk just a moment about the Data to Action campaign for parenting students, and to also answer some questions that have been raised through our Q&A. And I want to first just talk about the Student Parent Families at the Center project, which was supported by Imaginable Futures and brought together a really thoughtful leadership council of 45 stakeholders who included people who have both studied and experiential or lived expertise in issues affecting pregnant and parenting students. And the idea of the Student Parent Families at the Center project, which wrapped up last year, was to be able to understand all the different policy systems that student parents navigate when they're trying to pursue their education goals, and that their children or their families are touching on as well. We developed a framework that identified 11 large policy buckets, as well as 88 sub areas where student parents are and their families are concurrently trying to navigate supports, including social safety net, the tax system, financial aid, college access and success, childcare system, many others. And we developed through this a roadmap for change to support pregnant and parenting students that really is like a menu of the many, many policy and practice opportunities, as well as investment and research, to be able to push forward work to make education and life pathways more accessible to parents. But the first item was always data and the data barrier. And that's one reason that we're hosting this event, and the reason that we initiated the Data to Action campaign for parenting to support parenting students, as well as standing up our Student Parent Action Through Research Knowledge Spark Collaborative, which is a space for folks to be able to come together and coordinate, collaborate, and build upon each other's works and interests to be able to advance research and action that support pregnant and parenting students. So with that, we are currently, this event is part of our Data to Action campaign to support parenting students, which was the first project as part of the Spark Collaborative. And in that project, which actually currently has a grant opportunity open to California community colleges, as well as California State University system colleges, that'll be open for another just under 2 weeks. But as part of that project, we are trying to respond to the fact that there has been a pattern of legislation being passed, first in Oregon in 2020, and then in Illinois, and this year and then last year in California, and just this spring in Texas, to collect data on students' parenting status. And in Oregon, Illinois, and Texas, it specified that this is to be at the student record level, meaning that you could cross student parenting status with other characteristics that they may have, like their gender, their race, ethnicity, and other things that the college collects about them, as well as be able to track them. I will put links for those who are on the webinar, and we'll be sharing those after. But to be able to bring together a college community of practice to understand what actually best practices are to implement these mandates around student parent data collection, to be able to help the colleges themselves, but also help the field see that there are different ways of approaching this work, but there are also some promising ways that it'll be more effective to be able to inform action and not just collect data for its own sake, but to collect data for change. We're also doing that work working with some states as well as federal stakeholders to inform them about opportunities to be able to improve student parent data collection and be able to make it a more routine process that is going to serve the issues that we've been talking about in this event today. So we're very excited about all that work. I know I just dropped a lot of references, and I'll be putting a bunch, we'll be sharing them after the meeting. And for those who are on the live Zoom, we'll be putting them in the chat. But with that, I'd love to be able to take the last few minutes of this event for Q&A. And there have been several questions and answers that have been coming in through the Zoom. But there was one that I thought would be really good to touch off this discussion, which is from a member here who said that they will be transferring to a university next year that isn't very inclusive of student parents. How would you recommend I take steps to bring awareness to the student body and hopefully implement changes? I plan on first starting a club to create a safe space and support, but I'm thinking how to make a long-lasting impact for inclusion at this campus. And what I'd like to do is invite our panelists to be able to go on video now and give thoughts on that question. I shared a resource, the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit, which Erica mentioned, but I think there are probably others in sight. So if our presenters would like to come on video, and then if somebody would like to take a pass at thinking about how to start making a long-lasting impact for inclusion at a campus that hasn't been very thoughtful about parenting students.
Do you want us to raise our hands, or?
Go ahead, Caroline, why don't you start, and then we'll go to Erica. I think she had something there.
I think one of the first ways I would try is to maybe create a student organization, because that enables you to have, in most instances, free space to meet. The university typically doesn't charge you. It also puts you in line to request money from student government, so that you can host events or do some type of awareness. An official student organization opens up resources for you on the campus that will allow you to have a larger voice. It also kind of puts them on notice that there is such a population, and I think you only need 4 officers typically to get it going. So that's my first thought, and then move forward from there with the help of those few members. And you can do a whole lot on Zoom now, which wasn't in existence when I started 20-something years ago. So that makes it a lot easier. People don't necessarily have to have a babysitter in order to participate in a meeting.
Thank you, Caroline. Erica.
Yes, I'm the advisor to the Student Parent Association on my campus. I'm one of the co-advisors, and I can't say enough good things about the organization. The students really, have the pulse of their fellow students. And it was so interesting because our first president, she said, you know, the same thing that other people said here. I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the only one with a child on this campus. And since then, you know, she's met so many other student parents. They have a group me, they do events. So I guess from a practical level, look at what is required for a student organization on your campus. On ours, it was the same for officers, but you also need a faculty or staff advisor. And that does open up some limited funding to hold events. And it also gives you a chance to have a voice in the Student Government Association, which can be a very powerful tool for moving, getting visibility for other student parents. I also just want to say it can be difficult to find those officers because, as you know, student parents are often working, you know, they're taking care of their family, they're also in school. So just the time element can be difficult to make the time to organize all these events and do all of this work. So that, and also making sure you have a succession plan for the organization, because I do know like some institutions used to have one, but then the person graduated and it kind of fizzled out. And so to have that in mind as you start your new student organization.
I will say that I've heard a really good, what I felt like was a strong justification for orienting student activity resources towards parenting students, which is that often typical activities that are supported through student resources are usually not particularly family friendly. Either it's not an environment where you'd feel comfortable or confident bringing children, or they're scheduled at a time that would not be convenient to be able to participate. So student parents are much less likely to participate in athletic events and other social events that are organized with non-parenting students in mind. So therefore, it's equitable to be thinking about places where student activity funds can be oriented particularly for student parents and family-friendly activities, so that because they are a large share of college populations, and we'll see this as the data continue to be collected, it's something that is otherwise excluding it allows for a more equitable distribution of resources within the college. And Heather, go ahead now.
So just to add to the other excellent advice, I concur with all of it. Finding a faculty champion that is interested in doing the research or really collecting, you know, that data is also really powerful. That's something that we definitely learned in the basic needs movement, and we've carried forward in the parenting student movement for some of us that are involved in both. It can really change the game, and it can really help communicate to decision makers, leaders, you know, as this panel has talked about so eloquently today. So that's another thing that I would suggest is really getting to know your faculty and your student center faculty, and seeing who's interested in embarking on, you know, data and research projects to help communicate the true story, right? The best data is a story, the true story of what's going on. So.
The best data is a story. I just want to emphasize that what Heather just said, because I think that's very true. The best data is a story because data tells stories and stories are data. And we need to do what we can to understand each other and understand student populations better to be able to ensure that people have equal access. Just like if you don't measure gender, you can't look at gender differences. If you don't measure race, you can't look at racial differences. If you don't measure parenting status, you can't look at differences in opportunity for this population. So if you don't measure it, you're not going to be able to treasure it. You measure what you treasure, I've heard someone say. I see that we have 1 minute left, and I don't want to push the bounds of this Zoom session. I appreciate so much everyone joining today. We will be sharing out a summary of resources that were shared in the chat, as well as the responses in the Q&A. There will be a recording of this posted on the Urban Institute event page. We do ask everyone to take 1 to 2 minutes to complete the survey at the end of the will be available to those who attended the event live. And we'd love everyone to continue the conversation in various forums that may be available to do that, and to continue the conversation within your own communities and partnerships and on your campuses. So thank you so much, and we wish everyone a wonderful holiday weekend.